Hello again, and thank you for coming to join me in my little Hat Tales excursions for the day. I do want you all to know that eventually I will be trying to accept requests as soon as I figure out how to do the commentary on these things. But thank you for coming, and again, today's tale is The King of the Waterfalls, an old Scots-Irish tale. And as always, I will be reading the Andrew Lang version, because that is one of my favorite transcriptions. A long time ago, and far, far away, because that is how all tale begins, the young king of Road came into his kingdom, and you would not be mistaken to think that that means easy road. And as he came into his kingdom, the first thing he thought of was how he could amuse himself best, because obviously that's the most important thing, and not taking care of your kingdom. The sports that all his life had pleased him suddenly seemed to have grown dull, and he wanted to do something he'd never done before. At last, his face brightened. "I know," he said. "I will go and play a game with the Gruagach." Because, playing games with fairies is smart. Now, the Gruagach was kind of a wicked fairy, with long curly brown hair, and his house was not very far from the king's house, because that's how these things work. But though the king was young and eager, he also claimed to be prudent, and his father, on his deathbed, had told him to be very careful in his dealings with the good people, as the fairies were called. And therefore, before going to see the Gruagach, he set out to see a wise man of the countryside. A wizard, if you will. "I am wanting to play a game with the curly-haired Gruagach," said the king. "Are you indeed?" replied the wizard. "If you will take my counsel, don't. Play a game with someone else." "No, I wish to play with the Gruagach," persisted the king. "Well, if you must, then I suppose you must. But if you win that game, ask as a prize the ugly crop-headed girl that stands behind the door." "I will," said the king. So before the sun rose up, he got up and he went to the house of the Gruagach, who was sitting outside. "O king, what has brought you here today?" asked the Gruagach. "But right welcome you are, and more welcome you will be still if you will play a game with me." "Oh, that's what I want," said the king. And they played. Sometimes it seemed if one would win, sometimes the other, but in the end it was the king who was the winner. "And what is the prize that you will choose?" inquired the Gruagach. "Why, the ugly crop-headed girl who stands behind the door," replied the king. "Why, there are 20 others in that house, and each fairer than she," exclaimed the Gruagach. "Fair they may be, but it is she whom I wish for my wife, and none other." And the Gruagach saw that the king's mind was set upon her, so he entered his house and bade all the maidens in it come out one by one and pass before the king. And one by one they came, tall and short, and dark and fair, and plump and thin, and each one said, "I am she whom you want, and you will be foolish indeed if you do not take me." But he took none of them, neither short nor tall, nor dark nor fair, nor plump nor thin, till at last the crop-headed girl came out. "She is whom I wish," said the king, and though she was so ugly most men would have turned from her, because appearances are apparently everything, and if you can't be pretty, then don't exist at all, apparently. "We will be married at once," said the king, "and I will carry you home." And married they were. And they set forth across the meadow to the king's house, and as they went the bride stooped and picked a sprig of shamrock which grew amidst the grass. And when she stood upright again, all her ugliness had gone, and the most beautiful woman that had ever been seen stood by the king's side, because magic and appearances are not everything. The next day, before the sun rose, the king sprang from his bed and told his wife he must have another game with the Gruagach. "My father loses that game, and you win it," she said. "Accept nothing for your prize but the shaggy young horse with the stick saddle." "I will do that," answered the king, and off he went. "Does your bride not please you?" asked the Gruagach, who was standing by his own door. "Ah, does she not?" replied the king quickly. "Otherwise I would be a hard man indeed to please. But I've come back again. Will you play a game with me again today?" "I will," replied the Gruagach, and they played. And sometimes it seemed one would win, and sometimes the other, but in the end the king did again win. Now you might ask what game they were playing. I like to think they were bowling, because it's a very old game. But it could be any number of games, and the stories often conflict on what they are. But to return to this one. "What is the prize that you will choose?" asked the Gruagach. "Why, the shaggy young horse with the stick saddle," answered the king. But he noticed the Gruagach held his peace, and his brow was dark as he led out the horse from the stable. Rough was its mane, dull was its skin, but the king cared nothing for that, and throwing his leg over that stick saddle, rode away like the wind. On the third morning the king got up as usual before dawn, and as soon as he had eaten the food he prepared to go out, when his wife stopped him. "I would rather," she said, "that you did not go to play with the Gruagach, for though twice you have won, some day he will win, and he will put trouble upon you." "Oh, but I must have one more game," cried the king. "Just this one!" And off he ran to the house of the Gruagach. Joy filled the heart of the Gruagach when he saw the king, and without waiting to talk they played their game. Somehow or another the king's strength and skill had departed from him, and soon the Gruagach was the victor. Because you can't win every match, no matter how good you are. "Choose your prize," said the king, when the game was done, "but do not be too hard on me, or ask what I cannot give." "The prize I choose," answered the Gruagach, "is that the crop-headed creature should take thy head and thy neck, if that dost not get for me the sword of light that hangs in the house of the king of the oak windows." "I will get it," replied the young man bravely, but as soon as he was out of sight of the Gruagach he pretended no more, and his face grew dark and his steps lagging. "You have brought nothing with you tonight," said the queen, who was standing on the steps awaiting him. She was so beautiful that the king was fain to smile when he looked at her, but then he remembered what happened, and his heart grew heavy again. "What is it? What is the matter? Tell me thy sorrow, that I may bear it with thee, or that it may be that I help thee." And the king told her everything that had befallen, and she stroked his hair the while. "This is nothing to grieve about," she said as the tale was finished. "You have the best wife in all of Erin, and the best horse in all of Erin, and only do as I bid you, and all will go well." And the king suffered himself to be comforted. Because, thinking about sports all the time isn't a thing, and women are very, very clever, given you the opportunities to be so. He was still sleeping when the queen rose and dressed herself to make everything ready for her husband's journey. At the first place she went to was the stable, where she fed and watered the shaggy brown horse and put the saddle on it. Most people thought that this saddle was of wood, and did not see the little sparkles of gold and silver that were hidden within it. She strapped it lightly on the horse's back, and led it down from the house, where the king now waited. "Good luck to you, and victories in all your battles," she said, as she kissed him before he mounted. "I need not be telling you anything. Take the advice of the horse. See that you obey it." He waved his hand and set out on his journey, and the wind was not swifter than the brown horse, nor even the March wind, which raced it and could not catch it. The horse never stopped and never looked back, and until in the dark of night he reached the castle of the king of the oak windows. "We are at the end of the journey," said the horse, "and you will find the sword of light in the king's own chamber. If it comes to you without scrape or sound, the token is a good one. At this hour the king is eating his supper, and the room is empty. No one will see you. The sword has a knob at the end, and take heed when you grasp it that you draw it softly from its sheath. Now go, I shall be beneath the window." Stealthily the young man crept along the passage, pausing now and then to make sure no man was following him, and he entered the king's chamber. A strange white line of light told him where the sword was, and crossing the room on tiptoe, he seized the knob and drew it out slowly of the sheath. The king could hardly breathe with excitement, lest it should make some noise, and bring all the people in the house in the castle running to see what was the matter. But the sword slid swiftly and silently along the case until only the point was left touching it. Then a low sound was heard, as the edge of a knife touching a silver plate, and the king was so startled that he nearly dropped the knob. "Quick, quick!" cried the horse, and the king scrambled hastily through the window and leapt into the saddle. "He has heard, and he will follow, but we have a good start." And on they sped, leaving the wind behind them. At length the horse slackened its pace. "Look and see who is behind you," it said, and the young man looked. "I see a swarm of brown horses racing madly after us." "We are swifter than those," said the horse, and flew onward again. "Look again, O king! Is anyone coming now?" "Now I see a swarm of black horses, and one has a white face, and on that horse a man is seated. He is the king of the oaken windows." "That is my brother, and swifter still than I, and he will fly past me with a rush. You must have your sword ready and take off the head of the man who sits upon him. And as he turns and looks at you, there is no sword in the world that will cut off his head, save only the one in your hand." "I will do it," replied the king. And he listened with all his might till he judged that the white-faced horse was close. And then he sat up very straight and made ready. The next moment there was a rushing noise as though a mighty tempest, and the young man caught a glimpse of a face turned towards him. Almost blindly he struck, not knowing whether he had killed or only wounded the rider, but the head rolled off and was caught in the brown horse's mouth. "Jump upon my brother the black horse, and go home as fast as you can, and I will follow as quickly as I may," cried the brown horse. Leaping forward, the king alighted on the back of the black horse, but so near the tail he almost fell off. But he stretched out his arm and clutched wildly at the mane and pulled himself into the saddle. Before the sky was streaked with red, he was once again home, and the queen was waiting when he arrived, for sleep was far from her eyes. Glad was she to see him enter, but she said little, only took up the harp and sang softly the songs which he loved, till he went to bed, soothed and happy. It was broad day when he woke and sprang up again. "Now I must go to the Gruagach, and find out if the spells he laid on me are loosed." "Have a care," answered the queen, "for it is not with a smile as on the other days that he will greet you. Furiously he will meet you, and will ask you in his wrath if you have got the sword, and you will reply that you have got it. Next he will want to know how you got it, and to this you must say that but for the knob you had not got it at all. Then he will raise his head and look at the knob, and you must stab him in the mole which is on the right side of his neck. But take heed, if you miss with the point of the sword, then my death and your death are certain. For he is brother to the king of the oak windows, and will sure will he be that the king must be dead, or the sword would not be in your hands." After that she kissed him, and bade him good speeds. Arriving at the Gruagach's house, the king was much startled. "Didst thou get the sword?" asked the Gruagach. "I have gotten the sword," said the king. "And how did thou get it?" "If it had not a knob on the top, then I had not gotten it," answered the king. "Give me the sword to look at," said the Gruagach, peering forward. But like a flash the king had drawn it from under his nose, and pierced that mole, so that the Gruagach rolled over on the ground. "Now I shall be at peace," thought the king. But he was wrong, for when he reached home he found his servants tied together, back to back, with claws bound all around their mouths, so that they could not speak. He hasted to set them free, and he asked who had treated them in so evil a manner. "No sooner had you gone than a great giant came and dealt with us as you see, and carried off your wife and your 2 horses," said the men. "Then my eyes will not close, nor my head lay down, if I do not fetch my wife and horses home again," answered the king, and he stopped and noted the tracks of the horses in the grass, and followed them until he arrived at the wood, when darkness fell. "I will sleep here," he said to himself, "but first I shall make a fire." And he gathered together some twigs that were lying about, and then took 2 dry sticks and rubbed them together till the fire came, and he sat by it. The twigs cracked, and the flame blazed up, and a slim yellow dog pushed through the bushes and laid his head on the king's knee. The king stroked his head. "Woof, woof," said the dog. "Sore was the plight of thy wife and thy horses when the giant drove them past last night in the forest." "This is why I have come," answered the king. Suddenly his heart seemed to fail him, and he felt he could not go on. "I cannot fight the giant," he cried, looking at the dog with a white face. "I am afraid, and I wish to flee home." "Do not do that," replied the dog. "Eat and sleep, and I shall watch over you." So the king ate and lay down and slept till the sun woke him. "It is time for you to start on your way," said the dog, "and if danger presses, call upon me, and I will help." "Farewell, then," answered the king. "I will not forget that promise." And on he went, and on and on and on, until he reached a tall, tall cliff, with many sticks lying about. "It is almost night," he thought. "I will again make a fire and rest." This he did, and when the flames blazed up, the hoary hawk of the grey rock flew down to sit on a bough above his head. "Sore was the plight of thy wife and thy horses when they passed here with the giant," said the hawk. "I despair I shall never find them," answered the king, "and nothing shall I get for all my trouble." "Take heart," replied the hawk. "Things are never so bad as what they might be worse. Eat and sleep, and I shall watch thee." And the king did as he was bidden, and in the morning he felt brave again. "Farewell," said the hawk. "If danger presses, call me, and I shall help you." On the king walked, and till his dusk falling he came upon a great river, and on the bank there were sticks again lying about. "Here I shall make myself a fire," and he did. And by a smooth brown head peered at him from the water, and a long body followed it. "Sore was the plight of thy wife and thy horses when they passed the river last night," said the otter. "I have sought them, and I have not found them," answered the king. "I worry that I shall not be able to find them." "Be not so downcast," replied the otter. "Before noon tomorrow thou shalt behold thy wife. But thou eat and sleep now, and I shall watch over thee." And so the king did as the otter bid, and when the sun rose, he woke and saw the otter lying on the bank. "Farewell," cried the otter as he jumped into the river. "If danger presses, call me, and I shall help you." For many hours the king walked, and at last he reached a high rock, which was rent in two as though by a great earthquake. Throwing himself on the ground, he looked over the other side, and right at the very bottom he saw his wife and his horses. His heart gave a great bound, and all his fears left him. But he had to be patient, for the sides of the rock were smooth, and not even a goat could find a foothold. So he got up again, and made his way around through the wood, pushing past the trees and over the rocks and stones and the streams, till at last he was on the flat ground again, close to the mouth of a cavern. His wife gave a shriek of joy when he came in, and then burst into tears, for she was tired and frightened. But her husband did not understand why she wept, and he was tired and bruised from his climb, and a little cross too. "You give to me a sorry welcome, when I have half killed myself to get to you." "Do not heed him," said the horses, the weeping woman. "Put him in front of us, where he will be safe, and give him food, for he is weary." She did as the horses bade, and he ate and rested, till by and by a long shadow fell over them, and their hearts beat with fear, for they saw the giant was coming. "I smell a stranger," cried the giant as he entered. But it was dark inside the cave, and he did not see the king, who was crouching down between the feet of the horses. "A stranger, my lord? No stranger ever comes here, not even the sun." And the king's wife laughed gaily as she went up to the giant and stroked the huge hands which hung down by his side. "Well, I perceive nothing, certainly," answered he, "but it is very odd. However, it is time the horses were fed." And he lifted down an armful of hay from a shelf rock, and held out a handful to each animal, which moved forward to meet him, leaving the king behind. But as soon as the giant's hands were near their mouths, they each made a snap and began to bite him, so that his groans and shrieks may have been heard a mile off. And they wheeled round and kicked him until they could kick no more. And at length the giant crawled away and lay quivering in the corner as the queen went up to him. Poor thing," she said. "They seem to have gone mad. It was awful to behold." "If I had had my soul in my body, they certainly would have killed me," said the giant. "It is lucky then indeed. But tell me, where is thy soul, that I may care for it?" "It is up there in the bonnet stone," replied the giant, pointing to a stone which was balanced loosely on a shelf of rock. "Now leave me, that I may sleep, for I have far to go tomorrow." Soon snores were heard from the corner where the giant lay, and the queen lay down too, and the horses, and the king was hidden between them, so no one could see him. Before dawn the giant rose and went out, and immediately the queen ran up to the bonnet stone, and tugged and pushed till it was quite steady on its ledge, and could not fall over. And so it was in the evening when the giant came home, when they saw his shadow, the king crept down in front of the horses. "Why, what have you done to the bonnet stone?" asked the giant. "Why, I feared it should fall over and be broken, with your soul in it, so I put it back on the edge." "It's not there that my soul is. It is on the threshold." But it is time the horses were fed. And he fetched the hay and gave it to him, and again they bit him and kicked him, till as before, till he fell on the ground half dead. The next morning again he rose and went out, and the queen ran to the threshold and washed all the stones, and pulled up some moss and little flowers that were hidden in the crannies. And by, when dusk had fallen, the giant came home. "You cleaned the threshold," said the giant. "And was I not right to do it, seeing your soul is in it?" asked the queen. "It is not there that my soul is," asked the giant. "Under the threshold is a stone, and under the stone is a sheep, and in the sheep's body is a duck, and in that duck is an egg, and in the egg is my soul, sheep duckin'. But it is late, and I must feed the horses, And again he brought them the hay, and again they only bit and kicked him, and if his soul had been within him, he would have been killed. It was still dark when the giant got up and went on his way, and then the king and the queen ran forward and took up the threshold while the horses looked on. But sure enough, just as the giant had said, underneath the threshold was a flagstone. They pulled and tugged till the stone gave. Something jumped out so suddenly it nearly knocked them down, and as it fled past them they saw the sheep. And the king cried out, "If the slim yellow dog of the greenwood were only here, he would soon have that sheep." And as he spoke, the slim yellow dog appeared from the forest with a sheep in his mouth. With a whistle blow from the king, the sheep fell dead, and they opened its body, only to be blinded by a rush of wings as the duck flew away. "If the hoary hawk of that rock were only here, he would soon have that duck," replied the king, and as he spoke, the grey hawk was seen above them, and with the duck in its mouth. They cut off the duck's head with a swing of the king's sword, and took the duck out of its body, but in his triumph the king held it carelessly, and it slipped from his hand, and rolled swiftly down the hill into the river. And the king said, "If the brown otter of the stream were here, he would soon have that egg." And in the next moment there was the brown otter, dripping with water, holding the egg in his mouth, but beside the otter a huge shadow came stealing along, the shadow of the giant. The king stood staring as though he were turned to stone, but the queen snatched that egg from the otter and crushed it between her two hands. And after that the shadow suddenly shrank and was still. And they knew that the giant was dead, because they had found his soul. And the next day they mounted upon their two horses, and they rode home, visiting with their friends the brown otter, the hoary hawk, and the slim yellow dog. And all was right with the world. And there you see how a foolish king will be saved by his far more intelligent and clever queen. And it's not good to think about sports all the time, because it'll get you into a whole heap of trouble. But once again, I thank you for coming to listen to my tale, and I hope that you had a good time of it. Thank you, and farewell.